The salt spray kissed Safina's face as she climbed the cliffs overlooking her village. A peregrine falcon, her loyal companion Kaya, soared above her, a feathered shadow against the bright morning sky. Safina held out her gloved hand, and Kaya landed gracefully, her sharp talons gripping the leather. Safina rewarded her with a small piece of dried meat. From the cliffs, Safina could see the entire village spread out below. The fishermen mending their nets, the children playing on the beach, and the smoke curling from the chimneys of the simple homes. Her own home, a small cottage perched on the edge of the village, was where she practiced her other skill, her knowledge of herbs and their healing properties. She gathered them from the cliffs and the nearby forests, drying them and mixing them into remedies for the villagers. A cough, a fever, a cut, Safina had a cure for almost everything, but her skills with falcons and herbs brought little comfort. Her father, a fisherman hardened by the sea and driven by greed, saw her talents not as gifts, but as opportunities for profit. He often boasted of her falconry skills to the other villagers, hinting at the high prices such a trained bird could fetch. And her herbal remedies, though they eased the suffering of the villagers, were often bartered for fish or other goods, all of which went straight into her father's coffers. Safina longed for a life beyond her father's grasping hands, a life where her skills could be used for something more than mere coin. She dreamed of a place where the falcons soared free and the herbs bloomed untamed, a place where she could belong. But such dreams seemed distant and impossible, trapped as she was in her father's web of ambition. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, her father called her to him. His voice was gruff, his eyes glinting with a disturbing light. He announced his plan, a plan that would shatter Safina's world and send her on a path she could never have imagined. "The slave market in the port city opens next week," he said, his words sharp and cold as the sea wind. "You will be going with me." Safina's heart plummeted. She knew what this meant. She was to be sold. The port city buzzed with activity. Merchants shouted their wares, the air thick with the scent of spices and salt. People jostled each other in the crowded streets, their voices a constant hum. Hidden amongst the throng was Sultan Jalal, disguised in simple merchant's robes. He often visited the markets incognito, seeking rare plants and animals for his palace gardens and aviary. He had a keen eye for the unusual, a passion inherited from his late wife, who had shared his love of nature. The slave market was a place he rarely frequented, the sight of shackled youths and weeping families stirring a deep unease within him. But today, a particular merchant had promised him a rare breed of desert falcon, and so he found himself amidst the grim spectacle. The merchant, a portly man with a greasy smile, presented a series of birds, each more magnificent than the last. But Jalal's attention was drawn to a commotion at the edge of the market. A young woman, her face partially hidden by a simple veil, struggled to calm a panicked falcon. The bird, its wings clipped and its talons tied, thrashed wildly, its cries piercing the market's din. The girl spoke to the falcon in soft, soothing tones, her hands moving gently over its feathers. Slowly, miraculously, the bird began to quiet, its frantic movements subsiding. Jalal watched, fascinated. He had seen many falconers in his life, but none with such a gentle touch, such an innate understanding of these magnificent creatures. He approached the girl. His interest piqued. He saw the fear in her eyes, the resignation in her posture. Beside her stood a man, her father, his face etched with greed. Jalal recognized the look. He'd seen it countless times in the faces of those who valued profit over compassion. He inquired about the girl and her falcon. Her father, eager to make a sale, boasted of her skills, her knowledge of birds and herbs. He named a price, a hefty sum, but Jalal did not hesitate. He paid the man, the coins exchanged quickly, the transaction completed without fanfare. He took possession of the girl, unaware of the true identity of the falconer he had just purchased. He was simply a merchant, acquiring a skilled handler for his prized birds. He did not yet know that he, Sultan Jalal, had just changed the destiny of the girl named Safina. Safina's journey to the palace was a blur of unfamiliar sights and sounds. The bustling city gave way to quiet, tree-lined roads, the merchant's cart replaced by a luxurious carriage. She sat silently, clutching Kaya's cage, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and confusion. The palace gates loomed before her, immense and imposing. Guards, clad in gleaming armor, stood at attention as the carriage passed through the arched entrance. The courtyard was a riot of color, filled with exotic flowers and splashing fountains. Safina had never seen such opulence. The palace itself was a marvel of white marble and glittering gold, a world away from her simple cottage by the sea. She was led through a labyrinth of corridors, each more grand than the last. Servants, dressed in fine silks, bowed as she passed. Finally, she was brought to a large, airy chamber, filled with sunlight and the sound of birdsong. It was an aviary, a paradise for falcons and other birds of prey. Perches lined the walls, and lush plants filled every corner. Here, at least, Safina felt a flicker of familiarity, a sense of belonging. The merchant, who had remained silent throughout the journey, now turned to her. He removed his hood, revealing a face she recognized from the market. But it was different now somehow. The simple robes were gone, replaced by rich garments. The unassuming demeanor had vanished, replaced by an air of authority. It was then that Safina realized the truth. The merchant was not a merchant at all. He was the Sultan. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. She had been bought, not by a wealthy merchant, but by the ruler of the land. Her resentment, initially directed at her father, now extended to this man who held her fate in his hands. She felt trapped, a bird in a gilded cage. Jalal observed Safina as she took in her surroundings. He saw the apprehension in her eyes, the subtle way she handled Kaya, the quiet confidence in her movements. He was pleased with his purchase. He had sensed a unique talent in her, a deep connection with the creatures she cared for. He had not bought her for mere amusement, as some in his court might assume. He had seen something special in the young falconer, something that resonated with his own love of nature. He knew, with a certainty that surprised even himself, that Safina's presence in the palace was no accident. Safina's days in the palace settled into a routine. She rose with the sun, tending to the falcons in the aviary, feeding them, cleaning their perches, and exercising them in the palace gardens. The gardens were a haven for her, a place where she could escape the watchful eyes of the palace servants and the oppressive grandeur of the palace itself. She found solace amongst the fragrant flowers and the whispering trees, a reminder of the wild cliffs and forests of her home. Jalal, too, found solace in the gardens. He would often visit in the early morning, before the affairs of state demanded his attention. He would stroll through the manicured pathways, admiring the vibrant blooms and the playful fountains. He found himself drawn to the aviary, to the quiet figure of Safina, tending to his falcons. He watched her from a distance, admiring her gentle touch and the way the birds responded to her presence. He saw a quiet strength in her, a resilience that belied her young age. He would sometimes find himself lingering near the aviary, pretending to inspect a particular plant or fountain, just to catch a glimpse of her. Safina became aware of Jalal's presence. She would feel his gaze upon her as she worked, a warmth spreading through her despite her initial distrust. She would steal glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, her heart quickening at the sight of him. He was a striking figure, tall and regal, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He always spoke to her with respect, asking about the falcons, their health, their training. He listened intently to her answers, his gaze never leaving her face. These brief encounters, stolen moments amidst the formality of palace life, became the highlight of Safina's day. The resentment she had felt towards him began to fade, replaced by a hesitant curiosity, a flicker of something more. She found herself looking forward to his visits, to the brief conversations they shared, to the unspoken admiration that passed between them like a secret language. Jalal's favorite hawk, a majestic gerfalcon named Shahbaz, had fallen ill. The royal physicians had tried every remedy they knew, but Shahbaz remained listless, his feathers ruffled, his appetite gone. Jalal, worried about his prized bird, remembered the young falconer's knowledge of herbs. He had heard whispers amongst the servants of her skill in healing, of the remedies she prepared for the palace staff. He decided to seek her advice. He found Safina in the palace gardens, tending to a small patch of medicinal herbs she had been allowed to cultivate. He approached her, his usual regal demeanor softened by concern. "Safina," he said, his voice gentle, "I understand you have a gift for healing." Safina looked up, surprised by his directness. She had rarely spoken to him outside the aviary, their conversations limited to the care of the falcons. "I have some knowledge of herbs, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice respectful but wary. "Shahbaz is unwell," Jalal explained, his brow furrowed with worry. "The physicians are baffled. I thought perhaps you might have a remedy." Safina hesitated. She knew the risks involved in treating the Sultan's prized hawk. Failure could have dire consequences. But she could not ignore the genuine concern in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. "I would be honored to try, Your Majesty," she said, her voice gaining confidence. Jalal led her to the aviary, where Shahbaz perched listlessly on his stand. Safina examined the hawk carefully, checking his feathers, his eyes, his breathing. She asked Jalal about his symptoms, his diet, his behavior. Jalal answered her questions patiently, impressed by her thoroughness. Safina then requested specific herbs, some of which grew in the palace gardens, others she would need to gather from the nearby forests. Jalal granted her request immediately, ordering his guards to escort her to the forests and provide her with whatever she needed. Over the next few days, Safina spent hours preparing a special remedy for Shahbaz, carefully grinding the herbs, mixing them with honey and water, and administering the concoction to the ailing hawk. Jalal would often visit the aviary, watching her work, asking questions about her methods. Their conversations extended beyond the hawk's illness, touching on their shared love of nature, their childhood memories, their hopes and dreams. They spoke of the falcons, of the herbs, of the sea, of the stars. They spoke of the things that brought them joy, the things that made them who they were. In the quiet of the aviary, surrounded by the gentle rustling of leaves and the soft chirping of birds, a bond began to form between them. A connection deeper than either of them had anticipated. Safina began to see Jalal not as a sultan, but as a man who shared her passion for the natural world, a man who valued her knowledge and respected her skills. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the gentleness in his touch. She saw the vulnerability he rarely showed to the world. And Jalal, in turn, saw the strength and resilience in Safina, the intelligence and compassion that shone through her quiet demeanor. He saw the woman beneath the veil of servitude, a woman he was beginning to admire, a woman he was beginning to care for. The whispers in the garden, once filled with apprehension and distrust, now held a different tone, a softer melody of shared understanding and unspoken admiration. Rahman, Sultan Jalal's nephew, paced the opulent halls of the palace, his brow furrowed in thought. He was next in line for the throne, a position he believed was rightfully his. He had waited patiently for years, expecting his uncle to name him as his heir. But Jalal, still grieving the loss of his wife, had shown no inclination to relinquish his power. And now this girl, this falconer named Safina, had appeared, capturing Jalal's attention, distracting him from the important matters of state. Rahman saw Safina as a threat, an obstacle to his ambitions. He did not understand his uncle's fascination with her. She was a slave, a commoner with no claim to the Sultan's favor. He suspected she was using her skills with falcons and herbs to manipulate Jalal, to weave a spell over him. He had seen the way Jalal looked at her, the way he listened to her, the way he sought her advice. It was unsettling, unnatural. A sultan should not be so easily swayed by a mere slave girl. Rahman began to spread rumors about Safina, whispering to members of the court, to the palace guards, to anyone who would listen. He hinted that she was a sorceress, that she had bewitched Jalal with her falconry, that she was using her herbs to control his mind. He painted her as a dangerous influence, a threat to the stability of the kingdom. He knew his uncle was a just and fair ruler, but he also knew that Jalal was vulnerable, still grieving the loss of his beloved wife. He hoped to exploit this vulnerability, to plant the seeds of doubt in Jalal's mind, to turn him against Safina. Rahman's ambition was a consuming fire, burning away any sense of loyalty or compassion he might have once felt for his uncle. He saw the throne as his birthright, his destiny, and he would stop at nothing to achieve his goal, even if it meant destroying the reputation of a young falconer who had done him no harm. He believed that by removing Safina from the picture, he could regain his uncle's favor and secure his position as the next sultan. He was playing a dangerous game, a game of whispers and shadows, a game that could have far-reaching consequences. Rahman, fueled by his growing suspicion and ambition, decided to take matters into his own hands. He would sabotage Safina's work, create chaos in the aviary, and let the blame fall squarely on her shoulders. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into the aviary. He carefully unlatched the cages of several falcons, knowing they would create havoc in the palace gardens. He scattered feathers and overturned water bowls, creating a scene of disarray. Satisfied with his handiwork, he slipped back into the shadows, a smug smile playing on his lips. The next morning, the palace awoke to a cacophony of screeching falcons. The birds, disoriented and agitated, swooped through the gardens, causing panic amongst the servants and courtiers. Safina, rushing to the aviary, was met with a scene of chaos. Feathers littered the floor, cages lay open, and several of the falcons were missing. She immediately understood what had happened. Someone had deliberately sabotaged her work. News of the incident reached Jalal quickly. He was furious. The falcons were his prized possessions, a symbol of his power and prestige. He summoned Safina to his chambers, his face grim. "Explain yourself," he demanded, his voice sharp with anger. Safina, her heart pounding with fear, tried to explain. She told him about the open cages, the scattered feathers, the signs of deliberate sabotage. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Rahman, standing beside Jalal, subtly fueled his uncle's suspicions, reminding him of the rumors he had spread. He suggested that Safina, perhaps disgruntled or seeking attention, had staged the incident herself. Jalal, torn between his growing affection for Safina and the pressure from his court, found himself caught in a web of doubt. He wanted to believe her, to trust her, but the evidence seemed stacked against her. He ordered an investigation, but his trust in Safina had been shaken. Safina, feeling betrayed and alone, retreated to the aviary, the only place in the palace that offered any solace. She knew she was innocent, but she also knew that proving it would be difficult. Rahman had played his hand well, and she was now caught in his trap. The whispers in the palace grew louder, the accusations more pointed. Safina felt increasingly isolated, surrounded by suspicion and distrust. The gilded cage, once a haven, now felt like a prison. The investigation into the aviary incident yielded little. The palace guards, under Rahman's subtle influence, found no evidence of forced entry, no sign of anyone other than Safina having been near the cages. Their report, presented to Jalal, pointed towards Safina's negligence, if not outright malice. Jalal's advisors, eager to please Rahman, echoed these sentiments, urging the Sultan to punish the falconer for her carelessness. Jalal found himself torn. He had seen the genuine distress in Safina's eyes, the sincerity in her pleas of innocence. He remembered the hours she had spent tending to Shabazz, the gentle touch she had with the falcons, the quiet strength she possessed. He could not reconcile the image of the caring falconer with the accusations of sabotage, yet the evidence, however circumstantial, pointed towards her guilt. He was the Sultan, the ruler of the land, and he had a duty to uphold order and justice in his court. He could not ignore the concerns of his advisors, the whispers of discontent amongst his people. He decided to speak to Safina privately, one last time, before making his judgment. He summoned her to his chambers, the same room where he had first accused her. "Safina," he began, his voice weary, "I find myself in a difficult position. The evidence, though inconclusive, suggests your involvement in the aviary incident." Safina met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and defiance. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady, "I swear to you I had nothing to do with it. Someone is trying to frame me." Jalal studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, but he found none. He wanted to believe her, but the seeds of doubt, sown by Rahman, had taken root. "I want to believe you, Safina," he said, his voice laced with regret. "But I cannot ignore the evidence. I cannot allow such a blatant disregard for my property to go unpunished." He paused, his next words heavy with reluctance. "You will be confined to your quarters until further notice." Safina's heart sank. Jalal, the man she had begun to trust, the man she had begun to admire, had condemned her based on circumstantial evidence and the whispers of a jealous nephew. She felt a wave of disappointment wash over her, followed by a surge of anger. She bowed her head, accepting his judgment, but her heart hardened against him. She retreated to her quarters, a small, sparsely furnished room in the servants' wing of the palace. The gilded cage had become a prison, and the Sultan, once a glimmer of hope, now represented the injustice of her situation. Jalal watched her go, his heart heavy with conflict. He had made his decision, a decision dictated by duty and political expediency, but it felt wrong. He knew, deep down, that he had wronged Safina. He had chosen to appease his court, to maintain order, rather than trust the woman who had shown him nothing but loyalty and kindness. He paced his chambers, restless and troubled. He had defended Safina against the court's initial accusations, but the seeds of doubt, planted by Rahman, had grown into a thorny thicket of suspicion. He was divided, his loyalty to his position as Sultan warring with his growing affection for the falconer's daughter. He knew he had to find the truth, to uncover the real culprit behind the aviary incident, not only for Safina's sake, but for his own peace of mind. A young stable boy named Yasin had witnessed Rahman's nocturnal visit to the aviary. He had been tending to the Sultan's prized Arabian horses in the nearby stables when he saw Rahman slip through the shadows and enter the aviary. He had not thought much of it at the time, assuming Rahman had simply come to admire the falcons. But the next morning, when the chaos erupted in the gardens, Yasin remembered what he had seen. He realized that Rahman, not Safina, was responsible for the incident. Yasin was a kind-hearted boy, fiercely loyal to the animals he cared for. He had seen the way Safina treated the falcons, the gentle touch she had with them, the deep connection she shared with the creatures. He knew she was incapable of harming them. He felt a pang of guilt for not speaking up sooner, for allowing her to be accused unjustly. He decided to approach Safina to tell her what he had seen. He found her in the palace gardens, tending to her small patch of herbs. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with sadness. He hesitated, unsure how to approach her, how to reveal what he knew. "Safina," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, surprised to see him. He was a familiar face in the palace, often seen tending to the horses or carrying messages for the stablemaster. He told her everything he had seen that night, how he had witnessed Rahman entering the aviary, how he now believed Rahman was responsible for the incident. Safina listened intently, her eyes widening with surprise and a flicker of hope. Could this stable boy, this unlikely ally, be the key to clearing her name? "Are you certain it was Rahman you saw?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. "I am certain," Yasin replied, his voice firm. "I saw him with my own eyes." Safina considered his words carefully. She knew Yasin had no reason to lie, no motive to implicate the Sultan's nephew. She decided to trust him. "Thank you, Yasin," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have given me hope." They agreed to work together, to gather evidence against Rahman, to expose his treachery and clear Safina's name. A secret alliance was formed, a bond of trust forged in the shadows of the palace, a flicker of hope in the face of injustice. Safina and Yasin met in secret, often in the quiet hours before dawn, amongst the fragrant herbs in Safina's garden. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to be overheard by the palace guards or the ever-present servants. They planned their strategy carefully, knowing that a single misstep could have dire consequences. Yasin, with his intimate knowledge of the palace stables and the surrounding grounds, began to observe Rahman's movements. He noticed that Rahman often visited the stables late at night, spending time with a particular groom known for his discretion and his willingness to carry out unsavory tasks. Yasin suspected that Rahman was using this groom as a messenger, perhaps to communicate with someone outside the palace walls. Safina, meanwhile, focused her attention on the aviary. She meticulously examined the cages, searching for any clues that might have been overlooked during the initial investigation. She found a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the lock of one of the cages, a scratch that suggested the lock had been picked, not simply unlatched. She also discovered a few strands of dark hair caught on a thorny bush near the aviary wall, hairs that did not match her own. They shared their findings, piecing together the fragments of information like a puzzle. The picked lock, the strange hairs, Rahman's late-night visits to the stables, his association with the discreet groom. It all pointed towards a deliberate plot to sabotage Safina's work and discredit her in the eyes of the Sultan. But why? What was Rahman's motive? They knew he was ambitious, that he coveted the throne, but they could not understand why he would go to such lengths to frame a simple falconer. One evening, as Yasin was observing Rahman in the stables, he overheard a whispered conversation between Rahman and the groom. He could not hear every word, but he caught enough to understand the gist of their discussion. Rahman was plotting against the Sultan, not just to discredit him, but to harm him, perhaps even to remove him from power. The groom mentioned a rare poison, a poison that could be administered undetected, a poison that would leave no trace. Yasin's blood ran cold. He realized that Rahman's scheme was far more sinister than they had imagined. It was not just about framing Safina, it was about seizing the throne. He rushed to Safina, his heart pounding with fear, his voice trembling as he recounted what he had overheard. Safina listened in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Rahman's ambition, his jealousy, his whispered rumors, it all made sense now. He was not just trying to discredit her, he was trying to eliminate anyone who stood in his way, including his own uncle. They had stumbled upon a plot far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, a plot that threatened not only Safina's future, but the stability of the entire kingdom. Safina and Yasin knew they had to act quickly. Rahman's plot against the Sultan was a grave threat, a danger that could not be ignored, but they also knew the risks involved in exposing such a powerful figure. Accusing the Sultan's nephew of treason was a dangerous gamble, one that could easily backfire and cost them their lives. They decided to seek the counsel of a trusted advisor, a wise old man named Hakim, who had served the Sultan for many years. Hakim was known for his loyalty, his discretion, and his unwavering commitment to justice. He was also known to have a soft spot for Safina, admiring her skill with the falcons and her gentle nature. They approached Hakim cautiously, meeting him in secret in a secluded corner of the palace gardens. They told him everything they knew, Rahman's sabotage of the aviary, his whispered rumors, his late-night meetings with the groom, and the overheard conversation about poison. Hakim listened intently, his face grave. He knew the implications of their accusations, the potential consequences of their actions. "This is a serious matter," he said, his voice low and serious. "Accusing Rahman of treason is a risky gamble. We need concrete evidence, proof that will convince the Sultan beyond any doubt." Safina and Yasin explained the evidence they had gathered, the picked lock, the strange hairs, Yasin's eyewitness account of Rahman's visit to the aviary. They knew it was circumstantial, but they hoped it would be enough to convince Hakim of the truth. Hakim considered their words carefully. He knew Rahman's ambition, his thirst for power. He had witnessed the subtle ways in which Rahman had tried to undermine the Sultan's authority, to sow discord amongst the court. He had also seen the genuine affection Jalal held for Safina, the respect he had for her skills. He believed Safina and Yasin. He trusted their judgment, their loyalty. He decided to take a risk, to gamble on their honesty and their courage. "Very well," he said, his voice firm. "I will help you. I will present your findings to the Sultan. But be warned, this is a dangerous path we are embarking on. If we fail, the consequences could be severe." Safina and Yasin nodded, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and fear. They knew the risks, but they also knew they had no other choice. They had to try, for their own sake, for the sake of the Sultan, and for the sake of the kingdom. They had placed their trust in Hakim, their fate now intertwined with his wisdom and his loyalty. The risky gamble had been made, the die cast. Now they could only wait and pray for a favorable outcome. Hakim, with his years of experience navigating the treacherous currents of palace intrigue, knew precisely how to approach Sultan Jalal. He chose a moment when the Sultan was alone in his private library, surrounded by his beloved books and maps, a haven of quiet contemplation amidst the bustling palace. He presented Safina and Yasin's findings carefully, emphasizing the circumstantial nature of the evidence, while subtly highlighting Rahman's ambition and his growing discontent. He spoke of the picked lock, the strange hairs, the late-night meetings, the overheard conversation about poison. He did not accuse Rahman outright, but he planted the seeds of doubt, allowing them to take root in Jalal's mind. Jalal listened intently, his face betraying no emotion. He had begun to suspect that something was amiss, that Rahman's whispers and accusations were more than just the ramblings of a disgruntled nephew. He had noticed Rahman's growing arrogance, his subtle attempts to undermine his authority, his barely concealed disdain for Safina. Hakim's words, carefully chosen and subtly delivered, confirmed his suspicions. Jalal was a just ruler, but he was also a shrewd strategist. He would not act rashly, not without concrete proof. He needed to catch Rahman red-handed, to expose his treachery beyond any doubt. He devised a plan, a trap designed to lure Rahman into revealing his true intentions. He would pretend to be ill, to be weakened by a mysterious ailment. He would confine himself to his chambers, allowing rumors of his declining health to spread throughout the palace. He would then observe Rahman's reactions, waiting for him to make his move. Hakim, Safina, and Yasin were brought into the plan, each playing a crucial role. Hakim would act as Jalal's confidant, feigning concern for the Sultan's health while subtly feeding information to Rahman. Safina, with her knowledge of herbs, would prepare a harmless concoction that would mimic the symptoms of illness. Yasin, with his access to the stables and the surrounding grounds, would keep a watchful eye on Rahman's movements, reporting back to Jalal and Hakim. The trap was set, the bait laid. Now they could only wait for Rahman to take the bait, to reveal his true colors, to expose his treachery to the world. The fate of the Sultan, the future of the kingdom, and the destiny of Safina all hung in the balance, suspended in a delicate web of deceit and intrigue. The rumors of Jalal's illness spread through the palace like wildfire. Whispers filled the corridors, speculation rippled through the court. Rahman, believing his opportunity had finally arrived, grew bolder in his actions. He frequented the Sultan's chambers, feigning concern for his uncle's health while subtly inquiring about the line of succession. He began issuing orders to the palace staff, testing the limits of his authority, preparing to assume the mantle of power. Safina, confined to her quarters, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She knew Jalal's illness was a ruse, a carefully crafted deception, but she also knew the danger they were all in. Rahman was desperate, and desperate men were capable of anything. Yasin, risking his own safety, kept her informed of Rahman's movements, relaying every whispered conversation, every suspicious encounter. He reported that Rahman had been seen meeting with the same groom, the one suspected of procuring the poison. One night, Yasin rushed to Safina's quarters, his face pale with fear. "He's going to the aviary," he whispered urgently. "I saw him slip out of the stables, carrying a small vial. I think he's going to poison Shahbaz." Safina's heart leaped into her throat. Shahbaz, Jalal's beloved gerfalcon, was more than just a bird. He was a symbol of the Sultan's strength and resilience. Poisoning Shahbaz would not only be a cruel act, but a symbolic blow to Jalal's authority, a way to further destabilize the kingdom and pave the way for Rahman's ascension. Safina knew she had to act, to warn Jalal, to stop Rahman before it was too late. She disregarded her confinement, slipping out of her quarters and racing towards the aviary. She knew she was risking everything, but she could not stand idly by while Rahman carried out his sinister plan. As she approached the aviary, she heard Shahbaz's distinctive cry, a sharp, piercing shriek that sent a chill down her spine. She peered through the open doorway and saw Rahman standing before Shahbaz's perch, the small vial in his hand. He was about to administer the poison. "Stop!" Safina cried, her voice echoing through the aviary. Rahman whirled around, his face contorted with surprise and anger. He had not expected to be interrupted, especially not by Safina. "You!" he hissed, his voice laced with venom. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be confined to your quarters." "I know what you're doing, Rahman," Safina said, her voice trembling but firm. "I know you're trying to poison Shahbaz. I know you're plotting against the Sultan." Rahman's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around the vial. He knew he had been caught, his carefully crafted plan unraveling before his eyes. He lunged towards Safina, his face twisted in rage, intent on silencing her before she could expose him. Shahbaz, sensing the danger, let out another piercing cry, a cry that echoed through the palace gardens, a cry that would soon bring the Sultan and his guards running. Jalal, alerted by Shahbaz's cries, burst into the aviary, followed closely by his guards. He had anticipated Rahman's move, predicting his nephew's desperation and his willingness to strike at a symbol of his power. He had positioned his guards strategically around the aviary, waiting for the signal, the falcon's cry. He saw Rahman lunging towards Safina, the vial still clutched in his hand. "Rahman!" Jalal roared, his voice filled with authority and barely controlled fury. Rahman froze, his hand hovering inches from Safina's face. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting his uncle's, a mixture of fear and defiance in his gaze. The guards moved swiftly, disarming Rahman and pinning him to the ground. The vial containing the poison rolled across the floor, coming to rest at Jalal's feet. Jalal picked it up, examining it carefully. He recognized the distinctive markings on the glass, the telltale signs of a rare and deadly poison. "You were going to poison Shahbaz," Jalal said, his voice cold and hard. "You were going to harm my most prized falcon, a symbol of my reign." Rahman remained silent, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously between Jalal and the guards. "And you," Jalal continued, turning his gaze towards Safina, "you risked your own safety to warn me. You disobeyed my orders. You came here despite your confinement, and you saved Shahbaz's life." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at Safina. "You have proven your loyalty, your courage, and your unwavering commitment to what is right." He turned back to Rahman, his voice laced with disgust. "Your treachery is exposed, your ambition laid bare for all to see. You have not only betrayed my trust, but you have endangered the stability of the kingdom." He paused, his next words heavy with finality. "You are under arrest. You will be taken to the dungeons and held there until I decide your fate." The guards dragged Rahman away, his struggles futile against their superior strength. He cast a venomous glance at Safina as he was led away, his hatred burning in his eyes. Jalal watched him go, his face grim. He had loved his nephew once, but now all that remained was disappointment and a profound sense of betrayal. He turned to Safina, his gaze softening as he took in her pale face and trembling hands. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Thank you, Safina," he said, his voice filled with gratitude and something more, something that made Safina's heart flutter with a mixture of relief and hope. The truth was out, the treachery exposed. Justice had been served, and Safina, the falconer's daughter, had played a crucial role in its delivery. The following morning, Jalal summoned his court to the grand hall. He stood before them, tall and regal, his presence commanding the attention of every nobleman, adviser, and guard. Beside him stood Safina, still dressed in her simple clothes, but now holding her head high, her eyes clear and bright. Jalal addressed the assembled court, his voice resonant and clear. He recounted the events of the previous night, detailing Rahman's plot to poison Shahbaz, his treachery against the throne, and his attempt to silence Safina. He produced the vial of poison, holding it up for all to see, a tangible symbol of Rahman's treachery. A murmur rippled through the court, shock and disbelief etched on the faces of those who had believed Rahman's lies. They had underestimated the young falconer, dismissing her as a mere slave, a pawn in Rahman's games. They had not seen the strength of her character, the depth of her loyalty, the courage she possessed. Jalal then turned to Safina, his gaze filled with admiration and gratitude. "Safina," he said, his voice filled with warmth, "you have proven your loyalty beyond any doubt. You have risked your own safety to protect me and my kingdom. You have shown a courage and a wisdom that many in this court would do well to emulate." He paused, his next words echoing through the grand hall. "For your bravery and your loyalty, I hereby grant you your freedom." A gasp went through the court. It was unheard of for a sultan to grant freedom to a slave, especially one who had been accused, however unjustly, of wrongdoing. But Jalal was not finished. He stepped closer to Safina, his gaze locking with hers, his voice softening. "Safina," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I have come to admire your strength, your compassion, your unwavering commitment to what is right. I have also come to care for you deeply." A hush fell over the court, every eye fixed on the Sultan and the falconer's daughter. "I offer you not just your freedom," Jalal continued, his voice gaining strength, "but a place by my side. I offer you the leadership of my aviary, a position of honor and respect. And if you will accept it, I offer you my hand in marriage." Safina's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined such a future where she would be free, respected, and loved. She looked into Jalal's eyes, seeing the sincerity in his gaze, the genuine affection he held for her. She had come to this palace as a slave, sold by her own father, her destiny seemingly predetermined by the cruel hand of fate. But now her destiny had changed, transformed by the actions of a just and compassionate ruler, a man who had seen the value in her skills, the strength in her character, the beauty in her soul. "I accept, Your Majesty," she said, her voice soft but firm. A collective sigh went through the court, a mixture of relief, admiration, and perhaps a touch of envy. Jalal smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, a smile that transformed his face, making him look years younger. He took Safina's hand in his, raising it high for all to see. "Then let it be known," he declared, his voice ringing with joy, "that Safina, the falconer's daughter, is no longer a slave, but a free woman, the future leader of my aviary and my future wife." The wedding of Sultan Jalal and Safina was a joyous occasion, a celebration that echoed throughout the kingdom. The palace gardens, once the scene of Rahman's treachery, were transformed into a paradise of vibrant colors and fragrant blooms. Music filled the air, and the scent of exotic spices mingled with the sweet perfume of jasmine and roses. Safina, radiant in a gown of ivory silk, stood beside Jalal, her hand clasped in his. She had come a long way from the slave market, from the cliffs overlooking her village, from the shadow of her father's greed. She was no longer a commodity, but a cherished wife, a respected leader, a symbol of hope and resilience. Their marriage was not just a union of two individuals, but a merging of two souls, two hearts that shared a deep love for nature and a commitment to justice and compassion. Jalal, inspired by Safina's skills and her unwavering dedication to the well-being of others, proposed a vision, a dream that would transform the very place where Safina's journey of despair had begun. He would transform the bustling slave market into a sanctuary, a place of refuge for rescued creatures and disadvantaged youths. Together, they worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They established a rescue center for injured falcons and other birds of prey, providing them with care and rehabilitation before releasing them back into the wild. They created a school for orphaned and abandoned children, offering them education, vocational training, and a loving home. They built workshops where skilled artisans could teach their crafts, empowering young people to create their own livelihoods. They planted gardens filled with medicinal herbs, providing healing remedies for the community. The former slave market, once a place of despair and exploitation, was reborn as a beacon of hope, a testament to the transformative power of love and compassion. The shouting merchants were replaced by the gentle cooing of doves, the clanging of chains by the laughter of children, the stench of fear by the fragrant scent of herbs and flowers. Safina, now the head of the aviary and the guiding spirit of the sanctuary, walked through the gardens, her heart filled with joy. She saw children learning to read, young falconers practicing their skills, artisans creating beautiful works of art, and rescued birds soaring freely in the sky. She had not only found her own destiny, but she had helped to create a destiny of hope for countless others. Jalal, watching Safina's radiant face, felt a deep sense of pride and fulfillment. He had not only found a wife, but a partner, a soulmate who shared his vision for a better world. Together, they had transformed an auction of despair into a sanctuary of hope, a testament to their enduring love and their unwavering commitment to a brighter future. And so, the story of the falconer's daughter, once destined for a life of servitude, became a tale of resilience, courage, and the transformative power of love, a story whispered throughout the kingdom, a story that inspired hope in the hearts of all who heard it.